he sends his apologies as well. I won't introduce Nigel, I'll let him tell you all about himself, because his talk's only 25 minutes, so he'll have a few minutes to tell us about himself as well. So here's Nigel, VK3DZ.
Lovely to see you all here again, this august gathering. I'm going to do a little talk today, touching on three first glance disparate groups, namely Radio Australia, the forerunner of the CSIR, and the Moon. So I'll go over a little bit of history first. As we're all aware, Radio Australia was operating from the late 1930s until 2017, when someone turned it off. But in between that, it was used not just for broadcasting to our international neighbours, but it also assisted in scientific endeavour. Got the obligatory technical hiccup, so we'll play some program film while we hope to resume normal programming in just a moment. We're off? So just a 30-second refresher on the ionosphere. I think most people in this room will have a good working knowledge of it. The section I'm interested in is the nighttime ionosphere, so I've distilled it down to just two basic layers. The E layer, which was predicted in 1902 independently by two researchers, an American engineer, Kennelly, and a British polymath, Oliver Heaviside. Both hypothesised that there must have been some kind of refracting layer in the Earth's upper atmosphere. This wasn't proven until 1924 by another British physicist, Edward Appleton. And in addition to that, Edward Appleton also identified another layer which was known for a period as the Appleton layer. We know it as the F layer. And for that investigation and discovery, Appleton was awarded the 1947 Nobel Prize for Physics. So it's upon those two layers that all our international broadcasting between 2 and 40 megahertz depends. Without the ionosphere, without our atmosphere, without the stimulation of the atmosphere by the sun's emissions, we would not have international shortwave transmission as we all know it. So during the 1920s and the 1930s, broadcasting was kicking off around the world, and Australia, as always at the time, was crippled by the tyranny of distance. And so beyond medium wave broadcasting, Australia had an imperative to look at economical broadcasting to more dispersed populations. And to that end, in the late 1920s, the PMG radio branch established an experimental facility at Lyndhurst, just southeast of Melbourne, which was out in the sticks. This photograph, I'm sure many of you will have seen before, purporting to show the early transmitter sites. That's actually a shed, that's the outdoor dunny on the left, that's a shed at the back of the Lyndhurst post office. There's not a transmitter inside, it actually held a couple of receivers and miscellaneous odds and ends, but it was on that site that the PMG radio branch, as opposed to AWA and its own commercial sites, began doing investigations into shortwave transmission. So initially it was an experimental facility, and so late 1920s it had an experimental call sign. Anyone want to hazard a guess what that call sign was? No, that was AWA. It's in Lyndhurst. It's a radio facility. VK3LR. The current VK3LR here, do we? The person who holds that call sign today, I hope they're aware of the legacy behind it. I worked out that HF was quite a good vehicle for carrying broadcast programming to the inland and the islands, and so that was regularised from the late 1930s through until, in Lyndhurst's case, the mid-1980s with the call sign VOR and other related call signs. So the transmission facility during the 1930s was quite basic. A couple of 10 kilowatt transmitters, simple dipole rows. So they were typically stacked dipoles without any reflector. So what you probably find in our amateur radio books described as a lazy H array. So one horizontal dipole, half a wavelength above that, another horizontal dipole. It's a very easy way of getting quite considerable gain because you compress that vertical angle without generating myriad minor loads. And the frequency 9580 kilohertz was in use from that site from 1929, and of course that became a very well-known frequency used by Radio Australia right up until the close of Radio Australia for transmissions into the Central Pacific and by extension into North America. And if you couple 9580KHZ with gmail.com, you've got my email address. So we've moved a pace, we're near the end of the 30s, we could all see this coming. Well, a few of them couldn't. As Churchill said, you had a choice between dishonour and war. You chose dishonour, but you will have war. And so it came to pass in September, we found ourselves again at the start of another world war. So during this period, Germany was miles out in front with its international broadcasting service, and the BBC wasn't far behind. The BBC was concerned that it might lose its facility at some point. It knew it was within range of Luftwaffe bombers, and so there was strong encouragement from the UK government to the Australian government to beef up its international transmission on a global basis. So not just looking at our immediate concern of Southeast Asia and Pacific perhaps, but looking at establishing a world-class, world-reaching HF transmission facility. Initially, it was carried on the 10 kilowatt transmitters from Lyndhurst, but something better was required and was proposed by a British junior director of the BBC called George Ivan Smith. He was quite young at the time, he had an illustrious career in the diplomatic corps, and I met George Ivan Smith out at ABC Radio Australia in 1989 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of Radio Australia. There's this elderly British gentleman and his wife wandering around while all the riff-raff and hangers-on of the ABC were enjoying themselves merrily. And I said, "Hello, I'm Nigel. Can I show you around the building?" He introduced himself, George Ivan Smith. I had no idea who George Ivan Smith was, but he's a very interesting character. If you want to Google something tonight, try George Ivan Smith. Anyway, 20th of December 1939, the Australian government had more or less got its act together and said, the time has come to speak for ourselves. Well, the government didn't say that, this chap said it. He looks a bit glum there. That's Robert Menzies, the then Prime Minister, but not for much longer. He came back later in the 40s and 50s and 60s. So I think the reason he's looking glum there is that the 20th of December 1939 was actually his 44th birthday, and I think he was expecting a cake, and instead he gets a RCA 44BH microphone. Today, given the choice of cake or the 44 microphone, I think I would take a microphone. So with a considerable serve of federal budget, a big international transmitting station called the International High Frequency Transmitting Station was built at Shepparton. That was chosen for strategic logistical regions. Good source of power, good source of staff. Strategically it was thought to be on the reach of the Japanese. This is happening around about 1941 now, 42, so the Japanese are certainly on the scene. Obviously there were labour and manpower restrictions, to the sexist terminology. So you can see that looking at those characters, you'd say that they were probably First World War vets. So they probably knew a thing about adversity and how to, when the tough gets going, the going gets tough, the tough get going. So we noticed that character, this is before you've got laser in alignment of your rock drillers, so we've got a character there just guiding the drill bit with his hands. And you see that there's close attention being paid here to hearing protection, eye protection, and hand protection. Not the sort of thing we expect to see today. But in the fullness of time, a pretty impressive station was built at Shepparton. Hands up, anyone here who's visited the Shepparton transmitting station. So, and some of you that might have had illustrious careers with the PMG radio branch, technicians in training, even if you finished up in non-broadcasting areas, there's every chance you visited the Shepparton site. So what we had was a collection of transmitters. The very first transmitter was a RCA 50 kilowatt transmitter, a BH50, and that transmitter there continued in service. It launched the first broadcast on the 4th of May 1944 on 15 megahertz channel into the Central Pacific, and it continued giving sterling service until it was retired around about 1991, 1992. It was certainly still in service when I came on the scene. Now it's an interesting transmitter, and I don't know how to get a pointer out of this, so I'll get up and point. What we've got here are two 50 kilowatt RFPAs. So you're actually, if you're £80,000, which is what this transmitter cost, including spare parts and some test equipment, you're almost getting two transmitters for the price of one. So we've got one complete RF chain there, one complete RF chain there, power supplies are out the back, and there was audio in the middle. And that enabled you to undertake frequency changes quite quickly. You'd have one RF chain on air, banging away at 50 kilowatts, while men went in here with asbestos gloves and unplugged inductors and cranked variable capacitors. If I say that the RFPA was a pair of big triodes in push-pull, broadband push-pull amplifiers from 5 to 22 megahertz, not the most efficient way of doing things from implementing frequency changes, but push-pull was pretty impressive. So that's the transmitter there. It had an open top, and during the 50s or 60s, the occasional hijinks went on, and there were, for a period of time, flying model aeroplanes were in vogue. Can you imagine flying 1950s or 60s model aeroplanes with little regenerative receivers over the top of 50, and then just on the left-hand side, 300 kilowatt transmitters? Is there any RF floating around? Yes, probably about 150 volts a metre. So, to try and improve reliability, they actually built in over the top of that transmitter, and that's how I remember seeing it. So, I mentioned that the RF stage had a pair of fat triodes in push-pull. That was an RCA 880. I've got one at home from Shepparton. Do you think I can find it? It's not all that big. It's probably about 600 mil high. But quite an impressive beast. So it's got, if you're familiar with some of the other water-cooled 20 kilowatt valves, you've got the filament structure here, you've got a massive great projection out here. This one's folded back, so that anode continues up to about this point there, and made it quite good for high frequency work. You'll notice that the filament is in fact rated for 12.6 volts, so it's ideal for mobile work. Also, the other thing I like, I'll let the Yanks get away with using these stupid US gallons at this rate. Your anode rating is proportional to the gallons per minute you're pushing past that anode. I thought the transconductance was pretty impressive. That's a non-trivial transconductance. That valve in 1943, I looked it up before I came here. 813s are $22, 833 triodes, common in broadcast use, they were $76. This one's a bit dearer. It wasn't the dearest one at the time. There was one that was $1,200, an 889, I think, from memory. So, yes, those valves are still available from a number of manufacturers, not just RCA, but also General Electric and Matchlet. So we've got these impressive transmitters, broadcasting all around the world. As many of you will appreciate, the number one feature of a transmitting station, particularly an HF transmitting station, is its aerial complement. It's all in the aerial. It begins and ends with the aerial. So we had quite a few of them. These were single band, first generation curtain dipole arrays. So we've got a transmission station here on Verney Road. Those feed lines, 2,400 wooden poles across the site, which is why they ship broken beer bottle. There's $1 for the swear box. Is Randall here today? I'll give him $1. There were these poles across the whole site, so they were very nervous about grass fires, which periodically swept the site. Those feed lines are in the order of 3,000 feet, 910 metres long. So if we have, on this one here, which I have a pointer, if we look at the, I can almost get there, that one there. That's the 21 megahertz aerial for America, known imaginatively as A21. So that 3,000 foot feed line at 22 megahertz had a loss of less than 1 dB. No poncing around with SWR meters. We put 50 kilowatts in, we measured that, and at the output, at the input to the antenna panels, we measure 40 kilowatts. There you go, 9.7 dB. So balanced feeders are certainly the way to go if you've got long feeder runs at HF. Now you notice that the bearing on those American group aerials is 63 degrees azimuth, which is quite useful because for about 30 times a year you've got the moon rising up through that beam. That becomes crucial to our further discussions. Hand up who's read or who's got a copy of Radio 2. Good, right, okay, you can bequeath me a copy. I don't have one. I have seen one.
You've got it.
Terman, I need Terman, 1943 radio engineering, and a set of Radio 1 and Radio 2 would be delightful too. I'm prepared to crush your palm with gold or donate to the charity of your choice. So what we're looking at here is a first generation dipole array. We have four, now these are actually, that's half a wavelength, that's half a wavelength. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got 4 dipoles stacked vertically. This dipole's half a wavelength above ground, there's half a wavelength between the ones above it. And then immediately behind that we have an identical array of dipoles which are passive but attuned to function as reflectors. This is a one band affair, so about 2% bandwidth, not too bad. This particular one was JR21. So it's not an original. If you look at the J group, all those J group areas are still standing today. All these are gone and been updated. The J group, the J21 doesn't appear up there. So it came later, probably during the early 50s, but it's represented. So there's the 21 megahertz aerial. We're looking at front to back ratio about 15 dB. Azimuthal beam width plus or minus 18 degrees. And a take-off angle of 9 degrees, plus or minus about 4. So quite a constrained pattern, and a very clean pattern compared to the other aerials which were in use at the time, particularly rhombics. Rhombics are they're cheap and cheerful. Some unkind people say that it's an aerial that radiates badly in all directions. It's certainly a grubbier pattern than that. So here's that aerial you were just looking at before. A single band aerial, so design frequency equals the operational frequency, and we've got a very clean load. So the main load, plus or minus 18 degrees at the quarter power point, they're 3 dB increments. Take-off angle, 9 degrees. So the array is 4 half wavelengths high, so how many lobes in elevation do we expect to see? Also 4. And you can see that they're just there. This is the one we're interested in. The other 3 we don't worry about. That one is 10, 20, 30, 40 degrees. 40 degree takeoff angle at 21 megs. It's almost certainly going to blast into outer space. We're not worried about that. So that was the aerial that attracted the interest of CSIR. And during the war, a lot of interest was taken in developing radar systems. So there are a lot of very brainy people who were working at these unspeakable frequencies of 200, 400, 900 megahertz, other unnatural environments, and they came to take an interest in what we could do after the war with all this technology and knowledge. When was the first moon bounce, or first recorded detection of moon echoes undertaken? Anyone offer an opinion? Go on.
Americans were detecting Russian radar reflected off the moon in the late 1940s.
That's interesting. In the 1940s, Operation something or other was American Army operators running a system on 111.6 megahertz with 800 watts of power, 1946. But they were actually beaten by a pair of Germans, Wilhelm and Willy, 1943, at a German radar research establishment. They detected the echoes of their radar transmissions from the moon. So it's actually 1943 that it was first detected. For some reason I couldn't write about it at the time. But they're also enterprising amateurs. Remember that there was no real distinction between amateur radio operators and bleeding edge radio propagation researchers at this time. Some of the amateurs were up there with the best of them. Who's this chap? Anyone says Sheldon Cooper, I'll throw a peanut at them. It's not Sheldon Cooper. Now we all know W8JK and other legendary call signs. His call sign deserves it. You all know him. You all know him. Hazard against someone. No one? There we go. Someone said Great Reaver. So this character was born. He's 25 there. He's 26. He's built this. Unfortunately, the resolution's a little lost here. That's a parabolic reflector for an aerial operating at 160 megahertz, built specifically for detecting and quantifying emissions coming from outer space. No DX for this chap. So that's the world's first cosmic radio intensity map, done at 160 megahertz. This was just the start of what became a very enthusiastically invigorated field of scientific endeavour. Let's go back to radar, 1942. This is at Dover Heights, just south of Sydney Heads. The radar on the left is a 200 megahertz facility. You'll notice that there are Army personnel in both cases. This one is in the same site. This is a S-band or 900 megahertz radar facility. They're able to detect ships out 60, 70 kilometres away from Sydney Heads with an accuracy of 450 metres. So that's Sydney Heads. There's Sydney Heads in there going into Sydney Harbour. The facility after the war was handed over to CSIR, who had just recently brought back. Oh, that's the aerial supervisor at Dover Heights. So this equipment was handed over to CSIR, who were getting together a lot of their former staff who'd been working on radar. The chap on the right, all 192 centimetres of him, is Joe Pawsey. He was the head of CSIR's RPH, Radio Physics Laboratory, and he encouraged a lot of his budding researchers, postdoctoral researchers, to investigate radio astronomy activity above 100 megs. What's that? Come on, give me that. Thank you. You get the video. That's a pausing stuff. It's not the best method of matching coax to a dipole, but it was popular for a few decades, and that was a brief legacy of this chap, amongst amateurs. But he had a much bigger impact on radio physics laboratory. So the chap on the right is Alex Shane. Unfortunately, his brilliant career was cut short and he died of cancer in 1960. The chap in the middle, always impeccably dressed with waistcoat, tie and jacket, was Charlie Higgins, and he was what I suppose you'd call an STO 2 or 3 or something in the parlance of the day. Didn't have a PhD, but he had a brilliant mind. These two chaps were working on radio astronomy at frequencies, would you believe it, under 30 megahertz. So we have this site, Hornsby, some number of kilometres, north-west of Sydney, I don't know exactly where it is. The Old Man Valley's still there, it's now a BMX bike track. So you can see it's quite a picturesque one. They covered this area with dipolar rays, horizontal dipolar rays, using the ground as a reflector. Some of them were set up as transits so that they would use the Earth's rotation, so that the areas would be phased at maybe minus 32 degrees declination, and you use the Earth's to get a transit sweep of parts of the sky. So these guys are analysing the sky 9.15, 18.3, 19.7 megahertz, frequencies that we're not accustomed to regarding as appropriate for radio astronomy. Shane actually made measurements of signals that he was observing around 19.7 megahertz, and it wasn't until later that some Americans analysed his data and said we think they're coming from Jupiter. So Shane actually discovered the Jovian missions, which were around about 15 megahertz. So, Marty, what are those two valves up the top? No, you know what they are. Have a guess. You had a transmitter with a 2 or 3 or 4 of them in it. A pair of 807s. This is built by PMG Radio Branch to mess around with the RCA 50 kilowatt transmitter. The 3 bigger tubes, the jumbo-based tubes, I think they're thyrotrons. I think they're mercury thyrotrons, judging by the messaging. I don't think they're xenon or hydrogen. The frequencies that we were keying this transmitter on were a peak of sort of 1 millisecond pulses at a repetition rate of 40 hertz. I think that's probably within the scope of mercury. So the transmitter, unlike some of the stuff from Collins, the RCA transmitter had bags of room in it. So that rack was added to key the transmitter. Now that was still in place when I was up at Shepparton in 1990. When they were talking about pulling out this RCA transmitter. I was offered that lab rack with all the gear in it, and I couldn't think of a way to get it home, so bugger, there you go. The sheds at Hornsby, pretty rough and ready, judging by the camo. I'd say these have come from ex-military spares. The aerials that were here were again just simple arrays, a few rhombics but mostly dipole arrays. For the moon sounding project, the receive site, which was in the building with the little shed with the camo on it, used a pair of phased rhombics. Some of the other aerials up at Hornsby. Okay, Marty, what's that receiver? Very good. Marty gets another minty. So there's the ubiquitous AR88 sitting there, or the back end of it, with some other bits and pieces. There's something over on the left with some formidable looking insulators on it. That could not be inappropriate in any ham shack in the late 1940s. This was some of the gear made to display the signals received from the moon echoes. The bottom part was a long persistence cathode ray tube with a persistence of around about 6 seconds. Up the top we had aural detection. The aural detection, as it turned out, was about 2 to 3 dB more sensitive. So just using your ear roll was more sensitive than using the cathode ray display. Yes, there we go. It was an AR88, not that one. So there was a suite of signals. Some of them were there were long pulses designed to analyse the signal coming back through the ionosphere. To locate the echoes in the first instance, they would send a series of 3 quarter-second pulses. The pulse gear was at Shepparton. The line was, the pulse gear was keyed from Hornsby with a landline. So we're looking there at about less than a second of pulses. The fourth one is a little bit of E-scatter, and then you've got the moon echoes. So once you've detected the signals from the moon, you could use a range of other pulses. These ones here, this is a display of 3 echoes. You see that they're fairly closely spaced in time. The echoes coming back are suffering interesting ionospheric degradation. This is at 21.5 megs. And there's also another set of signals where they were sending 1 millisecond pulses at a 40 hertz repetition rate, which was designed to get a profile of the lunar surface. This made such an impact, and I've got my notes. This made such an impact that in 1952, this was happening in 1947 and 48, there were 30 days where trials were undertaken and reflections received on 24 of those occasions. There were 2 receiving sites in Australia. One was at Hornsby, and there was a secondary receive site at Rockbank, just out of Melbourne. That was run by O2C before Defence took it over. Not quite as good a performance as the Hornsby site. Anyway, so we had the International Union of Radio Science, which is still with us today. They had a congress in Sydney on the strength of Shane's publication. So Shane, a chap called Kerr and Higgins published in 1950, and it would cause quite a stir. So that's an interesting photograph there. We see Edward Appleton, the chap on the left in the overcoat. He's a character who confirmed Keneally and Heaviside's prediction of an E layer, and then went on to discover the F layer. The chap in the middle was Edward Taffy Bolton. He was the head of the radio physics laboratory, and then next to him we have the lanky Joe Pawsey, who was overseeing the radio astronomical research. So that's Alex Shane again. Charlie Higgins. This character here, some of you might be aware of cross interferometer arrays, Nils Cross, Chris Cross. Shane had a cross. Shane built a cross aerial just before he died, operating on about 18 megahertz. This chap is Chris Christensen, and he was the chap who designed and built the crisscross interferometer array. So that's another side. These are dignitaries from University. And of course, as a lot of researchers, you've got to publish it. So they were surprised that the signal strengths were way below what they predicted. Now, bearing in mind, this was happening in June 1947 for about a year through into mid-1948. The T-index then, solar activity if you like, was about the same as it is now. So over that year it went between about 130 and 160 if you're familiar with IPS and T-index. The tests had to be done at about 0200 to 0500 in the morning, because if you did it during daylight hours with a sunlit ionosphere, the frequencies wouldn't get to the moon, they'd get to North America, where the broadcasts were originally intended to go. So quite a bit of good research came out of that, and that set Australia for the next 20 years on the path of becoming eminent radio astronomers. Pawsey went on to propose and argue for the Parkes telescope, which we've still got today, and that's just a shot of Hornsby being illuminated by the Shepparton transmissions coming off the moon. Thank you for your attention. Any questions? Yes, Ralph.
Yes, my question. Looking at the patterns of the radiation patterns of those antennas in
Yes.
the first set of slides, given these days we've got Mini-NEC and other associated wonderful programs for predicting our radiation patterns. Here we are in 1943 or thereabouts. How do we go about putting up a mess of tangled wire in the sky and being able to confidently say, I say we are able to reach here and here and here?
The theory was well established in fact, by the early 1930s. There were some legendary investigators. G.H. Brown, for example, his works were groundbreaking on LFMF and HF propagation in the mid-30s. And by the late 30s, BBC RF engineers were able to design aerials for broadcasting. Those sort of patterns could be calculated, very laborious, using your six-figure log tables and your slide rule trying to speed things up a little bit. But you can basically get there. Today we talk about Sommerfeld, Norton, Earth. Sommerfeld was doing his research and offering equations 1910, 1920, in that period there. So just because you've got, I use an elderly version of LNEC. The kernel's basically the same as the later ones. It's only based on NEC 2, but I'm using it on an OS2 box, and it goes just as fast as the current iteration of LNEC NEC 2 on whatever contemporary PC might offer. So the equations haven't changed much, and the equations were there in the 1920s and the 1930s. Anyone else? Questions?
So what's the path loss between the Earth, the Moon and back again?
That's a question I should have predicted. But it's a lot less than 2 metres. It's a lot less than 6 metres because the path attenuation is a function of the distance in wavelengths. So if you look up the figures that you can find for EME on say 2 metres, you can extrapolate it linearly down to 20 megahertz, and you'll come out with a figure that's reasonable. So I can't tell what the attenuation loss is, but it's a lot less than, say, 50 megahertz, for example. Yes. Yes, you do.
How much of Radio Australia and Shepparton actually remains to this day?
Okay, the J group up the top, they're all there with actually a couple of additions. That area wasn't built until about 1947 or 48. That's a drawing that I took from S.H. Witt's excellent papers in the Telecommunication Journal, circa 1946. So I think it's, from memory, it's volume 6, number 3. And then the succeeding issue, he outlines all the plant on the site. So that's existing. The transmitter building's existing. The powerhouse is existing without the generators. The cottages disappeared about 30 years ago. The black square is a 100,000 gallon dam on site to hold rainwater when we've got water-cooled valves. This site here, we've now got the Pacific Group aerials down here. They're broadband arrays, they're curtain arrays, aperiodic reflectors, and typically cover one octave. So 6 to 12 big aerial instead of having 3 or 4 aerials to cover that range. So we have aerials in here and the J group. Anyone else? Drew? Yeah. I don't know who did it. I have nothing to do with it. It's nothing to do with me. I deny all knowledge. Well, I hope you've probably all seen Dave Stewart's YouTube clip. I felt like I was shooting my favourite dog. It's not a pleasant sensation because it's not just all the staff around. The immediate staff, the staff have gone before. But I've visited every little fly speck across the Pacific, okay, every little atoll, where, yeah, okay, we've lots of lovely satellites up there. You ever seen what a passing cyclone does to a C-band satellite dish? There it goes. So I saw firsthand, probably, the heyday of HF was probably 1960 to 1990, and in that period, BBC World Service was preeminent. But the number 2 and number 3 positions, and this is based on regular worldwide assessments of HF listeners, number 2 and number 3 were shared between Radio Australia and Hilversum, Holland. And we were both broadcasters who punched way above our weight. You had Radio Moscow in the period, VOA of course, Deutsche Welle, Radio France Internationale. They all had huge budgets, orders of magnitude greater than ours. But people recognise BS when it's waved under their nose. Whereas Radio Australia, we were rarely, if ever, jammed by PRC, even in the wake of the Tiananmen Square incident, because our reporting of news was deemed to be partial, comprehensive, and basically reliable. BBC said we were Radio Australia was the number one corroborative source of news around the world, and the number one source of news for the Pacific regions. That's the only way you can maintain your credibility, is, in spite of all adversity, you've got to remain impartial all the time. And without that, you have no legacy, you have no foundation. So, Radio Australia's gone on HF, but I have to say now, apart from Sanjian and Texan, who makes an HF receiver, they're gradually diminishing across the areas where we had HF audiences, and I don't think it's going to come back anytime soon. Anyone else? Right. Thanks very much.